Nothing prepares you for the sound of silence where a cry should be. Nothing prepares you for the weight of words like premature and NICU falling into your life without warning. One moment you are counting weeks, imagining nursery colors and tiny socks, and the next you are counting breaths through incubator glass. This is not just a story about premature twins. It is a story about discovering strength in the most fragile place imaginable. It is about standing under fluorescent hospital lights and realizing that hope can survive even there. When life begins smaller than your hand, fear grows large, but so can faith. This is the journey that changed me forever, and the strength I never knew I had until I had no choice but to find it. Today, I want to take you inside one of the most defining seasons of my life, the birth of my premature twins and the days that followed in the neonatal ICU. This is not just about medical procedures or hospital monitors. It is about faith tested in uncertainty, hope rising in sterile rooms, and resilience forged in exhaustion. If you are walking through something fragile right now, whether it is a health crisis, a family challenge, or a season that feels overwhelming, I hope this story reminds you that strength often appears when you least expect it. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Sometimes the stories we share become the strength someone else is searching for. I had always imagined pregnancy as a steady unfolding, a predictable countdown measured in doctor visits and growing anticipation. But when I learned I was carrying twins, joy was braided tightly with caution from the very beginning. Every appointment felt heavier with meaning, every ultrasound image both miraculous and intimidating. And although I followed every instruction, drank every glass of water, and guarded every movement, there was an underlying awareness that twin pregnancies walk a narrower road. When complications began earlier than expected, the shift was sudden and sharp, transforming routine monitoring into urgent evaluation, transforming excitement into concern. The word premature entered the room softly at first, spoken in careful tones, but it echoed loudly in my mind long after the appointment ended. I realized that control was an illusion I had been gently holding onto, and as that illusion dissolved, something deeper began to form beneath a tan awareness that strength would soon be required in ways I had never rehearsed. The day they were born arrived not with celebration but with controlled urgency, a choreography of medical precision moving around me while my heart raced ahead of understanding. Bright surgical lights replaced the soft nursery glow I had envisioned, and instead of the long-awaited cry filling the room, there were quick assessments, hushed conversations, and movement towards specialized equipment designed for lives that arrived too soon. I remember the overwhelming mixture of awe and fear when I first saw them, impossibly small yet undeniably powerful in their presence, their fingers delicate as threads, their skin translucent and brave. There was no moment to cradle them against my chest for long. Instead, they were transferred carefully into incubators, and I watched motherhood begin through clear plastic walls. That separation carved something inside me, yet it also awakened a fierce protectiveness that felt ancient and instinctive, as if my heart had doubled in size to match the number of lives now depending on it. Walking into the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit for the first time felt like crossing into another world, one governed by steady beeping monitors, soft alarms, and the quiet focus of nurses who moved with both efficiency and compassion. The NICU was not loud in the way I had imagined. It was rhythmic, almost meditative, filled with machines that breathed and blinked and measured the fragile balance of tiny bodies learning how to exist outside the womb. My twins lay in separate incubators, surrounded by wires and sensors that both terrified and reassured me, because every cord represented vigilance, every number on a screen a sign that someone was watching over what I could not control. I felt small in that room, dwarfed by medical terminology and unfamiliar routines, yet at the same time I felt anchored by the knowledge that this was where they needed to be. Love became practical there, expressed not through rocking chairs and lullabies but through hand sanitizer, whispered prayers, and careful touch through porthole openings. Each day in the NICU stretched and compressed time in strange ways, turning hours into emotional marathons and weeks into blurs of progress measured in grams gained and oxygen levels stabilized. I learned a new vocabulary, one filled with acronyms and cautious optimism, and I clung to small victories that once would have seemed insignificant: an increase in feeding tolerance, a successful breathing trial, a night without alarms. Hope became granular, built not on grand milestones but on incremental improvements that required patience I did not know I possessed. There were setbacks too, moments when numbers dipped or infections threatened stability, and in those hours I felt the ground shift beneath me again. Yet something surprising happened in that environment of uncertainty. Resilience began to grow quietly within me, not as loud confidence but as steady endurance. I discovered that strength is often less about bold declarations and more about returning the next day, and the next, and the next, even when exhaustion sits heavily on your shoulders. Faith took on a different texture in those weeks, moving from abstract belief into something tactile and urgent. I found myself praying not for distant futures but for immediate needs, for lungs to strengthen, for hearts to regulate, for tiny bodies to continue fighting through each fragile night. The hospital chapel became a refuge, a small space where silence felt sacred rather than clinical, and I would sit there gathering courage before walking back into the controlled brightness of the unit. I did not always feel peaceful, and I did not always understand why this chapter had been written into our story, but I began to trust that faith was less about having answers and more about holding on when answers did not come. It was in that tension between fear and trust that I encountered a deeper layer of myself, one that refused to surrender to despair even when circumstances offered every reason to do so. The nurses and doctors became both guides and witnesses to our unfolding story, explaining complex procedures with patience and celebrating milestones with genuine warmth. I watched their steady hands adjust ventilators and feeding tubes, and I learned to read their expressions for reassurance when words felt too heavy. In their competence I found comfort, recognizing that resilience is often communal rather than solitary. They encouraged skin-to-skin contact when possible, gently placing each twin against my chest, and in those moments the machines faded into the background while I felt the astonishing rhythm of two small heartbeats against my own. Those brief periods of closeness were transformative, reminding me that even in medical fragility there was profound connection. I realized that motherhood in the NICU demanded a different kind of courage, one that balanced gratitude for expertise with the vulnerability of not being able to fix everything myself. There were nights when I returned home physically depleted yet unable to rest, my mind replaying monitor sounds and imagining worst-case scenarios in the quiet darkness. The house felt incomplete without the baby's presence, and the nursery waited in suspended expectation, cribs assembled but empty. In that space between hospital and home, I confronted the weight of uncertainty more intensely than anywhere else. I questioned my body, my decisions, and sometimes even my capacity to endure another day of not knowing. Yet even in those private struggles, resilience continued its quiet work. I learned to breathe through anxiety, to focus on what had gone right that day rather than what might go wrong tomorrow. Strength did not arrive as a sudden revelation. It accumulated slowly through repeated acts of showing up, of choosing hope again despite fatigue. I began to see that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to love fiercely in its presence. As weeks turned into a pattern of cautious progress, the twins began to grow stronger in visible and measurable ways. Their movements became more coordinated, their skin less translucent, their cries more defined and insistent, as if they were declaring their intention to thrive. I celebrated weight gains that would have once seemed negligible and found myself memorizing every new expression and stretch. The NICU staff spoke of discharge in tentative terms, introducing the possibility of taking them home while reminding us of the continued care they would need. The thought filled me with both relief and apprehension, because the structured safety of the hospital had become familiar territory. Leaving it meant stepping into responsibility without the constant reassurance of monitors. Yet I also sensed that the same strength that had carried us through the earliest days would not disappear at the threshold of the hospital doors. Throughout the journey, I discovered that resilience is rarely dramatic. It is woven from ordinary moments of persistence layered upon one another until they form an unbreakable fabric. It appeared in early morning drives to the hospital, in pumping sessions timed with precision, in notebooks filled with medical updates and questions for rounds. It lived in the way I learned to advocate for my children, asking clarifying questions and requesting explanations without apology. The experience reshaped my understanding of capability, revealing reserves of endurance that had been dormant until necessity awakened them. I stopped measuring strength by outward composure and began recognizing it in vulnerability, in tears shed openly and still followed by determination. The NICU did not only nurture my twins' survival, it cultivated my own transformation, refining patience, deepening empathy, and expanding my capacity to withstand uncertainty without collapsing beneath it. Hope evolved from a fragile wish into a disciplined practice, something I chose intentionally each morning as I sanitized my hands and approached the incubators. It required acknowledging risks without allowing them to dominate every thought, balancing realism with expectation. I began to see hope not as denial of difficulty but as defiance against despair, a quiet insistence that progress was possible even when it unfolded slowly. There were days when improvement plateaued, when it seemed as though we were suspended in a waiting room of progress, and those were the days hope demanded the most courage. I learned to anchor myself in evidence of past victories, however small, using them as proof that forward movement had already occurred. In doing so, I discovered that hope is cumulative, strengthened by memory and sustained by faith that today's stability could become tomorrow's breakthrough. The bond between the twins themselves became another source of inspiration, as I watched them respond to each other's presence even within the confines of medical equipment. When positioned close together, their vital signs often steadied, as if their shared origin provided comfort beyond technology. Observing that connection reminded me that resilience can be relational, nourished by proximity and shared struggle. It encouraged me to foster closeness whenever possible, to speak softly to both of them at once, reinforcing the idea that they were never alone in their fight. In witnessing their interdependence, I recognized my own need for support, allowing family and friends to step in with meals, messages, and prayers. Accepting help became an act of strength rather than weakness, an acknowledgement that enduring hardship is rarely a solo endeavor. Eventually, the long-anticipated discharge day arrived, accompanied by a mixture of celebration and cautious instruction. The monitors were removed, the paperwork reviewed meticulously, and I dressed each twin in clothing that at once seemed impossibly large for their tiny frames. Carrying them out of the hospital felt surreal, as though we were stepping from one chapter into another without fully comprehending the magnitude of what had transpired. At home, the nursery transformed from a symbol of absence into a space of gentle routine, filled with feedings, medications, and vigilant observation. The responsibility was immense, yet so was the gratitude that we had reached this point. I understood that the journey had not ended. It had simply shifted form, requiring continued attentiveness and resilience beyond the hospital walls. In the months that followed, as the twins continued to grow and gradually close the gap between their adjusted and actual ages, I often reflected on how profoundly the experience had altered me. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming now appeared manageable in comparison to those early weeks of uncertainty. I carried forward the lessons of patience and perspective, recognizing that fragility and strength often coexist more closely than we realize. The memory of beeping monitors no longer triggered only anxiety but also gratitude, because they represented the vigilance that had safeguarded my children during their most vulnerable days. I began to speak openly about our journey, hoping that transparency might offer encouragement to others navigating similar terrain. Looking back, I see that the strength I discovered was not a new trait implanted into me, but a capacity that had always existed, waiting for circumstances to call it forth. The premature birth of my twins stripped away illusions of control and replaced them with deeper truths about endurance, faith, and the power of persistent hope. It revealed that resilience is not reserved for extraordinary individuals but emerges in ordinary people when love demands it. Though I would never have chosen the fear and uncertainty of those weeks, I cannot deny the growth that arose from them. The NICU was a crucible, refining not only my children's physical strength but also my own inner resolve. Today, when I watch my twins laugh and move with energy that belies their fragile beginnings, I am reminded that beginnings do not dictate endings. Their early arrival did not define the limits of their lives. It illuminated the depth of their determination and the expansiveness of love that surrounded them. The journey through prematurity taught me that strength often reveals itself in moments when surrender feels easier, that faith can coexist with doubt, and that hope is sometimes the bravest choice we make. In recounting this experience, I honor the fear we faced, the resilience we cultivated, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest lives can carry immeasurable power. The strength I discovered was forged in vulnerability, sustained by faith, and proven by the steady rhythm of two once fragile heartbeats that continue to echo with possibility. If this journey has taught me anything, it is that strength is often hidden beneath layers of uncertainty, waiting for love to call it forward. The neonatal ICU was not just a place of medical care, it was the space where faith deepened, hope matured, and resilience became real. Premature beginnings can feel like detours from the life you imagined, but sometimes they are the path that reveals who you truly are. Whatever fragile season you may be facing, remember that endurance grows one breath, one day, one small victory at a time. And within you, even now, there may be a strength you have not yet discovered until the moment you need it most.